Good morning, everybody. And I can't even say good afternoon, it's only good morning. This is a load management dialogue presented by PLMA. And here you'll discover practitioner perspectives on flexible energy load management, demand response, and distributed energy resources. My name is Judy Knight. I am PLMA's Chief Development Officer, and I'm really excited about today's session. It will be an interview with Jill C. Anderson, Executive Vice President of Operations for Southern California Edison, on the subject of bringing together different perspectives to drive innovation. It's hosted by PLMA's Women in Demand Management Affinity Group, which is a new initiative by PLMA. And just to introduce our speakers today, our Women in DM group is co-chaired by Jessie Meyerhoff, who is Product Marketing Manager with Generac Grid Services. Sangeeta Ranade is head of Vice President of Energy and Services with AlphaStruxure, which is a joint venture between Schneider Electric and the Carlyle Group. And Erica Keating, who is not able to join us this morning, is a Principal Manager of Customer Demand and Generation Programs, also at Southern California Edison. And now let's turn today's presentation over to PLMA's Women in Demand Management Co-Chair, Jessie Meyerhoff. Jessie, let's get started. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Judy, and Jill, thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into the content of today's fireside chat, because we have a broader audience, I'd just like to introduce Women in Demand Management. So some of you have heard this 3 or 4 times now, but I think we have an important mission to share. Women in Demand Management is an affinity group, the first affinity group with PLMA, and we promote female leadership and advocacy in the energy sector by fostering honest and constructive conversations on gender issues, by providing a forum for networking and professional development, and by encouraging greater cooperation and communication among men and women to cultivate productive and diverse workplaces. And so as Women in DM, Sangeeta, Erica Keating, and I took over late last year into early this year co-chairing and decided that we really wanted to build our programming and the work that we do as this affinity group around the key pillars, of leadership development, education and inclusivity, and social events and networking, because while we do all of these important things, we like to think of us as the most fun affinity group. We can say that because we're the only affinity group today, but forthcoming affinity groups, the challenge is there. We're kicking off today with our Women in DM inaugural speaker series event with Jill C. Anderson here of SCE. And if you stay tuned until the end, I'll also announce a mentorship program that some of you might be familiar with and will be relaunching as we head into the fall. Next slide, please. To determine the content and the style through which we achieve those pillars of programming, we released a survey to all PLMA members, men, women, last fall, asking them what they would like to see. And so preferred activities came back first and foremost as a fireside chat, so why you're all here today, but also these small and more moderated discussions. And so while we do have quite a large audience joining into the room right now, we'll try to keep this feeling quite intimate as we move forward. The preferred topic of most members was also to build, manage, and foster diverse teams. And so as this is the first speaker series event, we thought it important to address that topic head on. To engage the broadest audience possible. And so as we move through this, hopefully you'll hear tips from Jill, you'll hear her story and tools that you can keep in your own personal toolbox to expand your network and think about how you'd like to move through your career, regardless of what stage you're at, regardless of your background or what role you're in today. And so with that, that's enough of my talking. I will pass it off to Sangeeta to introduce Jill.
Great, thank you, Jessie. I appreciate the introduction. I'm super excited about today's conversation because we really wanted to create a dialogue that's very inclusive, right? Our focus is on creating a space where more people have a voice and that their ideas are heard. And many of our membership are actively involved in the clean energy transition. And so we know that means thinking about new ways of working and making the most of this changing market environment. And so, I ask that we all think very broadly about diversity in this conversation. We've all, had different moments where we felt that it was a struggle to get our voice heard, whether you're the introvert in a room of extroverts or a new person on a team veterans, or a East Coast executive moving into a West Coast utility, right? We've all had that experience where we have to demonstrate our point of view and bring people along with us on this journey. And that's why I'm excited for our conversation with Jill Anderson. She is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Southern California Edison. I will not read all of her bio to you, but her responsibility includes leading transmission and distribution, customer service, safety, security, business resiliency, and operational services. It is a heavy duty role where she is responsible for bringing reliable, clean, and affordable power to 15 million people. Prior to that role, she was the Senior Vice President of Customer Service and the Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning and Power Supply, all at Southern California Edison, all within the last 5 years. So she really has a broad ranging view of these important organizations in the clean energy transition. And she's got a vision that's informed by that, and she's bringing people along with that. Prior to Southern California Edison, she was at the New York Power Authority, which is where we met, and she had a similarly expansive, wide-ranging role and a very fast trajectory there as well. So I'm really excited for this conversation, and we will have sort of more of like a fireside chat piece. But I think before we jump into that, it would be nice to just flip it over to Jill so that she can set the stage with her perspective and point of view. So thank you, Jill. Welcome.
Thanks, Sangeeta. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I've been really excited about this conversation. So I just want to say that the chat is open, and I invite everybody to go ahead and post any comments that you have there. We'll take them as we go. I really would love this to be as interactive as possible. When I thought about the topic that Sangeeta and the team asked me to address today, I went back to something that I thought of earlier this year on International Women's Day. I posted a letter, an open letter on LinkedIn to my 2 daughters. And in there, I talked about a fear that I have that when they enter the workforce, and they're just little 5 and 9 years old right now, I'm afraid that the workforce that they enter in 15 years or so is going to be pretty similar to the one I entered 20 years ago, or the one that we're all working in today. And I wouldn't have thought that, if you had asked me the day that I was graduating college. I would have told you that, my generation, this is the seat, we are going to solve this diversity problem. We are not going to be talking about underrepresentation of genders or ethnicities or races by the time my children are graduating college. But unfortunately, the progress has been maddeningly slow. If we look at any metric you want, if we look at the number of Fortune 500 company CEOs who are female, when I graduated college in 2003, it was 2%. Right now, it's 8%. It has not, it's moved, but it is moving at a snail's pace. And I think some of these statistics are even worse when you're looking at the progress that we've made in underrepresented races and ethnicities. But we're here to talk about diversity because I believe that diversity and moving these numbers faster and creating an inclusive environment, one that I'll be proud for my own daughters to enter in the next couple decades, it's absolutely possible. It is possible for us to move forward a lot faster in the next 20 years than we have in the past 20 years. And, I think that it's something that is important that we have discussions about, which is why I was happy to be invited and be included in this conversation today. I'm going to share some of my experiences, what's worked, what hasn't worked. I'd love to hear from you and learn from all of you as well in the chat and the questions in the conversation that we're about to get into. I'm trying to frame some of the points that I wanted to raise this morning in ways that will be valuable to you. Something that maybe you could apply in your own situations, and I'd love to hear some of your questions and your perspectives as we get into it. There are really just 2 main strategies that have worked for me on this path. I've been starting from engineering school, in the early 2000s to today, where I'm the Executive Vice President of Operations. So I'm going to share a few stories. And I think in doing so, I want to, very similar to what Sangeeta said in her intro, I want to think about diversity in a different light than the way we typically talk about it. Instead of focusing on the aspects of diversity that we don't really control, like our race or our gender, I want to talk about how we each individually can think about our own diversity and leveraging the ways that we can make ourselves more diverse to our advantage. I'm also going to share a couple of maybe mistakes I've made along the way, and hopefully that's opportunities for you to learn from things that I did wrong, and you can have an even faster track. So the first strategy is that I want to share is about focusing more on strengths than gaps. And then the second strategy I'm going to talk about is being really intentional about diversifying your experience, and how really, and what I did in my career is I charted my own path to the next level. I didn't follow a typical resume of the person who was before me. So in the first strategy, I'm going to tell you a story about capacitor banks. And so I was a supervisor right out of school. I was 22 years old, working for Con Edison. I'm sure many of you are familiar. You might even have some Con Edison employees on the call with us today. I was working in the heart of Manhattan and Manhattan substations, and I felt woefully underqualified to be directing the work of these mechanics and electricians who had decades of hands-on experience. Maybe some of you can relate if you've ever moved into a new job or taken on an assignment that you felt was a real stretch for you. Here I was right out of college, and I felt that this fancy engineering degree I had was basically useless in this new job capacity that I was in. But then one day we were doing preventative maintenance on capacitor banks inside a substation. And I went through our normal job briefing and talked about safety and the steps and all of the risks that we were mitigating and ways we were setting up the job. But I decided to embellish, and I went on and I explained why these capacitor banks are so important and why it's important particularly to the type of customers that we were serving in the area out of that substation. And my mechanics that day, they asked a lot of questions. Questions about, well, why are the cap banks in this substation different than the ones that we maintain in a substation down the road, or how come that substation doesn't have any at all? And so we spent an extra 5 or 10 minutes talking about cap banks. And this was a real light bulb moment for me, because after that job briefing, one of the mechanics came up to me and thanked me for getting into all that detail and saying, they've been doing this job for years, but never asked or was never told, like, why are the cap banks different at every substation, or why do we have them in the first place? And they were really grateful that I engaged them and shared what, honestly, to that point, capacitor banks to me were 2 lines that I was drawing on a circuit diagram in college as of like 4 months prior. And so I thought I had like no value and no knowledge and could not be useful at all in this situation. But it turns out I did have something that was helpful to this situation, to my colleagues, something many of my other supervisors who'd come up through the field or who'd been a long time since they'd been in college weren't offering. And this light bulb moment for me was really about sidestepping that whole feeling of imposter syndrome. And instead of focusing on what are all the qualifications I don't have, or what makes me challenged in this role versus everybody else I look around who doesn't look like me, I focus instead on what is the value that I bring? What are the strengths that I have that maybe other people don't have? And I think you can think about this, applying to jobs, applying to different projects or assignments. And instead of focusing on the gaps between you and the person who just was there before you, or the person who's doing the job next to you, I don't focus on that at all. Focus on your unique combination of education and experience and point of view, and think about what are the advantages that you are bringing, because your diversity, you're in that job for a reason. And it's because people believe in you, they're taking a chance on you, and it's not because they're trying to mold you into exactly the person who was in that job before you. And I think I have done that over and over again, really leveraged what's unique about me. Sangeeta made a joke about the diversity of moving from East Coast to West Coast. That was me just a couple of years ago. And, I thought, I don't know anything about California. I'd only ever been to California twice. And one of those times was for the job interview. So like, what am I bringing to a big California utility in this big job? But I know a lot about the utility business, and I know a lot about how things work in other jurisdictions, under other commissions, with other system designs, and I know that the lights stay on. So I have a unique contribution to make about helping us here in California open our eyes to other ways of doing business. And I leverage that while in the meantime kind of catching up on the history, the knowledge, the regulations, and all of the context here that I also need to do my job well. But I don't need that on day one. On day one, I can still add value. So I think the big takeaway is, know your strengths and then know how to apply them and get recognized for them instead of thinking about all the time your gaps or what you're missing. The second tip I wanted to share is around diversifying your experience intentionally. So we do all have control over, what jobs we're applying for, what assignments we're raising our hand for, what companies we want to work for. And in my 20 years, if you look in my LinkedIn profile, you'll see I have been all over the utility business, and I've done that in only working for a couple of employers, but it's been very intentional. So an example is back at the New York Power Authority, where Sangeeta and I met. 10 years into my career, I was the chief of staff working for the CEO of NYPA at the time. And the VP of Regulatory and Public Affairs retired. And that group included corporate communications, regulatory, government affairs, a very relationship side of the business. Now, at this point, I had no experience on that side. I had no experience running a communications team. I was an engineer. I was a supervisor in operations. I was running renewable energy at some point before I was the chief of staff. I had a very technical career to date. But I saw an opportunity and I talked myself into making a bold move in one of my one-on-ones with my boss. And I made a pitch that he should give me a chance in this vacant role. We knew we were going to have to look outside to fill it anyway, so it's going to sit vacant for a while. Put me in, even if it's just temporarily. I knew very little about the traditional ways of running public and regulatory affairs. But I knew I had some strengths I could leverage. I was already very active on social media personally, and this was 10 years ago at a time when companies were still figuring out what social media was going to be for how they were going to leverage that. So I said, hey, that's one area I can make a difference. And in the meantime, while you go out and look for somebody else, at least we'll make some inroads on social media and then pull me back out and put in some expert if that's what you want to do. But my plan was I was going to knock it out of the park in this job, and he was going to give me the job permanently, as long as permanent is in our careers. And I knew even if that wasn't the case, that just temporarily being in the role and being able to put on my resume, for 6 months also ran public and government affairs, that was something that was going to be valuable to me, because there are not a lot of people who have a technical and operations path like I did who then get time and seat in this other really important area of the business. So I did get the position permanently, beat out any of the external candidates who we were considering. And I ended up doing the job for a couple of years. I loved it. We launched into social media. We advanced the way that we were communicating with customers. And I felt like I really had a chance to use my technical knowledge because I could communicate about all these exciting projects we were doing, but in a way that was helping us reach people and reach the stakeholders that matter to us. And when I moved back out of that role into an operating role again, I became the chief commercial officer. I continued to use all those skills that I had grown while I was in public affairs. I was still using all the different internal and external communications channels to reach now my own teams and my own stakeholders. And that's something I still do today. And I invite, if anyone would like, I'd be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn, or I'm active on Instagram and Twitter. And I'm talking all the time about what we're doing, how we are advancing our clean energy vision at SCE. And it's a way too that I have, just in my organization, I have 10,500 people. There's no way for me to communicate effectively just through company email to that many people. I'm reaching them today through Instagram. I'm reaching them through Twitter and through LinkedIn, and you see it in my posts. You'll see I get a lot of employee engagement. So I have taken that diverse experience and now helped it make me better back into a technical job, and helping that kind of leverage a strength again, like the first tip. So all of that sounds like I'm this genius in managing my career, and it was all real smooth sailing. But the truth is, I made a lot of mistakes, and we'll get into the Q&A here in a second. But I wanted to share one mistake in particular to hopefully help you avoid a path like this, to anyone who might be similarly minded to I was. And I think this story starts out with feeling like you're not in the in crowd. I definitely have many times in my career felt like I work for the same company, I have the same badge, but like I'm not really like in the club, no matter how good my job performance is. Like, I don't know, it's sort of back to like middle school days with like the cool kids at the lunch table. And there especially were earlier points in my career where I really struggled. Like when I was a field supervisor, and my strategy was to try to fit in with the in crowd, just like I tried to do in middle school unsuccessfully. But, I tried, for example, to pretend like I was a sports fan, because in the early mornings when we were getting all the jobs ready out in the districts or in the yards, everybody was always talking about baseball. So I would like listen to AM radio on my way into work to hear the recaps of baseball games so that I could like be in the conversation. Or, people were talking about going to play golf. So I even took golf lessons once, thinking like, oh, okay, this is going to be a thing. I'm going to be a golfer. I'm a terrible, terrible golfer. No matter what I did, no matter how many kind of shortcuts I took or how many baseball games I actually watched, there's really no way that I could ever catch up on a lifetime of knowledge that comes from when someone's really a true fan. And it took me a while to come around to this realization that pretending to be something else so that I could fit in, it's difficult, it's distracting, it's pretty ineffective. I wasted a lot of time, and instead of trying to force fit myself into something that is not my natural interest, I now look at ways on how do I steer the conversation into something where we do have commonality. There is something that we together can talk about, and also appreciating, especially at this point in my career where often I get to drive those social conversations just because of my job title or status. I look around the room to see, well, who's feeling left out? Like, this is something I think about because a lot of people want to talk about kids when they want to talk to me. I've got 2 young kids. It's unusual for an executive in a role like me to be a working mother. And I love it. I embrace it. I'll talk about my kids all day long. But I look around the room sometimes, not everybody's got kids. Not everybody's got young kids anymore. Not everybody wants to talk about kids. So I try to change the subject when I notice that I'm doing something that's making other people feel like they're not in the in crowd. And I think this was it took me a couple of years earlier in my career to come around to this. And I do think about it still on a regular basis because I appreciate and recognize that I'm in a position of influence here, and people want to be in a conversation with me in these rooms. So what am I doing to make everyone feel like they are included? So those were just the few tips that I wanted to start out with as we transition over into the Q&A here. And I think in summary, it's really about the opportunity for all of us to realize the power of our own diversity. Thinking about how beautiful and amazing, powerful it is, just how each of us is unique and bringing those unique perspectives, and what can we do so that we really accelerate on these next 15 years before my kids get into the workplace. And I look forward to partnering on all of that with you. So I'll turn it back over to Sangeeta, and I'll look in the chat and see if we've got any questions. So looking forward to talking. Sangeeta, I think you are still on mute.
Yes, we do have a couple questions coming in, so we'll cover those as we kind of chat back and forth. First of all, thank you for that intro. Super helpful. I really appreciate your point of view as well. I have 2 children. I love to talk about them, but I think you're right. Not everybody wants to talk about our kids. And it's just one of those examples of where it can be a great tool for making people feel included and opening the conversation, but it can also sometimes shut down conversation. I'm very curious from your perspective, as you've moved from like individual contributor to manager to leader, how you've adjusted your style or sort of grown into that role and sort of allowed your vision to grow and then bring people along with you.
Yeah. Oh, so one thing that I think is important in each time that I'm in a different job, I think about, what's the change that I can help drive? What's the mark I'm going to make? And, in my career, I've really only held positions usually for about 18 months. And so I always feel like I have this clock ticking. I got this job 6 months ago. I hope I have this job longer than 18 months because it's a big job and I'm excited about it. But I'm already thinking like, man, 6 months have gone by. Like what difference am I making? What impact am I having? If I move into another role, what legacy did I leave behind? So it's always in the back of my mind, but thinking about how do you effectuate change, especially in large established organizations, it starts for me with appreciating why are we where we are today. It can be really natural to move into a different role or move into a different company and you look around and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. What are you guys doing? How come you're not doing it this way? Like you guys are in the dark ages, right? You gotta hold that in, withhold judgment and withhold criticism. And instead I focus on appreciating why are we here? Like, why are we doing it this way? Because usually it's because the right business decisions have been made along the way based on the context that those decisions were made at the time. But now I try to help us look forward and say, what's today's context? So maybe we had a strategy around how to get customers to adopt solar, or we had a strategy around electric vehicles and where we should put chargers. And maybe all that made sense when we were laying those strategies out 5 years ago, but those markets have changed dramatically. So how do we focus forward and then get people on board with making a change because they can also see the forward vision the way I see it? Like, oh yeah, you're right. We can't keep sending people, mailers to all the same addresses to get them to adopt solar if they've ignored it for the last 5 years. We got to do something different. And that way you're avoiding really criticizing the status quo or making people feel like until you got here, like you guys were doing it all wrong. And especially in companies that a lot of us work for where the turnover is really low, one thing I keep in mind is, when you think about the status quo, the architects of the status quo are still working here, right? The people who made the decisions that got us to where we are. And in our case, we're one of the largest utilities in the country. We've been very successful. And so there are a lot of things we did right along the way, but we need to change dramatically. And I need people on board with that change. And I got to do it in a way in helping us stay looking forward and avoiding the tendency to criticize, well, why are we doing it this way? So that's been a strategy I've used from, especially once, kind of moving from individual contributor to manager, because I think an individual contributor has a little more license to be like, hey guys, I got a new idea. You still are going to need to get people on board, but it's like, I hired you for new ideas. A manager is, you're in a position where you really got to be really thoughtful about how are you motivating other people? How are you getting other people to do things the way you would want it done when you're not in the room? And so it starts with getting people on board with that forward look.
Great. Jill, you mentioned sort of moving from roles after about 18 months, and it can be really hard in that initial new role because there's so much to learn and come up to speed on. One of the questions that's coming through the chat is how do you sort of keep yourself from being spread too thin? How do you manage your time?
Oh yeah. Time management is, I think, one of the most important skills, right, that any of us have. It's often talked about as like the most precious resource. I have a lot of strategies that I've used. I've got a busy life, like I'm sure all of you do. One thing I do is I'm really thoughtful about saying no, and saying no in a way that I don't feel like I'm letting people down. There's a great book I often recommend called How to Have a Good Day by Caroline Webb. And she talks about the positive no. and how, I get asked to speak at a lot of events and I'm very selective. So I appreciate all of you, including me here. And I was really looking forward to this, but I turned down a lot of other events. And when I do that, I don't say it in a way like, oh man, I really want to help you, but I'm just too busy doing things that are more important to me. That's really the truth, right? I say, hey, I'm focusing right now on getting up to speed on this new job, or I've blocked off time that week because I'm trying to get out with customers. So instead of me, here's 3 other people who you could consider. And it's a win-win because I'm telling them why I'm doing something that is important to me and that's important to my business, to the people who are depending on me. And I'm hopefully giving an opportunity for other people as well. So I'm really selective and careful about how I manage my time. And I look at it like an engineer would, like very much like a balanced equation. And I look forward and I look backwards every single day and on where have I spent my time? Was that right? Were enough time with people? Was it enough time with customers? Have I been in the field enough? And then I look forward and say, where are my time commitments next week and the week after? And my schedule is pretty much booked through December right now. So do we have that time booked in the right place? And I think that allows me to avoid, I never feel like I'm spread too thin because I made intentional choices about where I spent my time every day. I'm here because I said yes to this and I said no to something else. So even though I'm sure there's some internal meeting that I'm not at right now, I've delegated that and I am happy about the choice that I made to be here. I feel very in control of managing my time.
I love that. I love the intentionality. I think that's super important. I appreciate that. Joe, can you talk about, some people that get into these roles and they go along to get along because that is one path. But I mean, you talked about like some of these changes that you've made, whether it was going into communications and opening up the social media lens for NYPA, or moving into this role and opening up all this new infrastructure for SCE. How have you gone about sort of bringing people along with you, particularly people who were invested in that previous decision to make it look the way it did?
Yeah. I think we have to think about all the different ways that people are influenced. And so you're influenced by your direct boss and the boss's boss, the corporate leadership, kind of to a point, right? So we put out corporate goals and we put expectations in people's performance reviews, but we can't expect that then we walk away and now their hearts and minds are fully aligned with everything that we just laid out. It's for many people, that's just one box that they're going to check throughout the day, but they're still going to put their time and energy and creativity into the parts of their job that they care about the most. So I try to think about how do we reach people in all the different ways that they get inspired. And so I do a lot of storytelling. I'm in the field a lot. I'm with customers a lot. And whenever I have an audience with employees, I'm telling a story about something that I just saw yesterday in the field or some conversation I just had with a customer, trying to make it real and personal to people and appeal to what is the part that they get excited and motivated in their job. Because unfortunately, it's not the list of corporate goals that we published in January. That's not the end of it. We have to help make that very alive for people, and you have to do it every day, all year. And that's why I do try to leverage social media. If you see, I use a lot of photos. I tell a story about something. I spent last Friday in a meadow in the Sierra Nevadas picking up tadpoles and looking at tadpoles and frogs because I was learning about our endangered species program. And it's like great content to help people connect with why environmental compliance matters. Versus if I just sat and said to you, like, it's really important that we never break any rules and regulations and environmental compliance needs to be 100% and I'm going to grade you on it and I'm going to pay you on it. And compliance just turns people's brains off when you say the word. But I bet you the people who I talked about tadpoles with are going to remember why I was talking about tadpoles, right? So thinking about how to reach people in that very human way.
Can you also talk about, this is a question that came in on the chat, like maybe some strategies that you've used for some of these new initiatives that you're using at SCE, and specifically the questions around agile strategies? And you know, this is sort of part of that whole change and bringing a new approach to work and moving faster.
Yeah, I don't see the specific question, but okay. Oh no, I see it here from Jesse. So it is, I think it starts in a utility environment particularly, and this applies for people who are vendors of utilities, partners, utilities, selling to utilities. Sometimes we think about our business context as being very rigid. You know, I have a 3 or 4 year general rate case cycle, so I'm locking in advance what I'm going to spend money on for years. And then we think, well, if I've got a program with 100 pages of requirements that have been approved by a commission somewhere, if I want to do something different, like segment the customers different, pay the incentive differently, I'm going to have to go through some 2-year modification process. And I think that mindset sometimes slows us down and keeps us anchored in a way to the past, because is the first year that I'm operating in a rate case is already, the information is already 2 years old from when I actually wrote that application. And the same is true of our programs, of our incentives and all of that. It's all based on old information by the time you actually implement it. So what we've been able to do in some key areas at SCE is really leverage the narrow sometimes, but important flexibility that we have. So we launched a virtual power plant in 2020. And we did it using funding around time of use rates. We didn't create a whole new application about virtual power plants and put through, a whole new multi-year process to create some brand new funding stream. We used an existing pot of money we had. We made the argument successfully that if virtual power plants could help people better align with their new time of use rates, therefore, we should try out different incentive structures, different ways to market to customers, and all under the umbrella of time of use. So I think it's about like how to be more agile in a utility environment, or if you are a partner to utilities, is think creatively within the box that we've already drawn, because drawing a new box is going to take us a couple of years. But I don't believe that we are as handcuffed as maybe others would describe us. And I don't think that's the intention either of our partners or of the commission. Ultimately, we all have the same goals. We want clean energy adoption. We want low and affordable bills for our customer. We want safe and reliable power. So whatever I'm doing, as long as I can demonstrate I'm within the construct that we've agreed to, and we have the same goals, I think we have a lot of flexibility.
I have to say, I really appreciate the creativity that you bring into your role. And it's particularly impressive because I think you've been in these organizations for so long, but you've always sort of kept at the forefront of pushing for that change. And there are a lot of people in the PLMA who've moved within or outside their organization. They've jumped from role to role or between utilities and technology providers. What advice would you have for people who they're trying to build up their skill set by jumping across organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a fundamental level, it's like be bold in what you're bringing and that impact that you're making. For me, that, clock is ticking kind of mindset, because, people want you to make a difference. And they've hired you to help them move them forward. And even though sometimes you're switching, you've got a lot to learn, and you've got to figure out how things get done at a new company and all of those, the mechanics, stay focused on that. Like, what change am I driving? What difference am I making? Because that's why you were hired, and that's why you're going to get promoted. And even if it feels frustrating or feels uncomfortable, there have been times in my career where it took me years to make a change. I came in 2018, and I was like all about smart speakers and smart displays at home, and we are going to launch it at Southern California Edison first. We're going to do it. I think finally, it's 2022. I think finally we are in the place that I thought we could get to. And other utilities, some of them did get there before we did, but everybody associated with that push with me and knew that I believed we could do it. And so I think you've got to stay focused on what about what are you bringing and what difference are you making, and that will be rewarded.
When you talk about some of this change that you've been bringing to the table, can you provide some insight into the role that like mentors or allies or sponsors have played for you specifically, and then how you've sort of passed that on to people as well? And it's a little bit of a buzzword as well sometimes when we say allies and sponsors. So maybe if you could define what it means to you, that'd be helpful as well.
Yeah, I do think that people play different important roles for us throughout our careers, and the definitions matter. So early in my career, I was assigned a mentor through a company mentoring program. His name is Brian Horton, and he worked at Con Edison as an executive for many years, and was incredibly influential on me. Just that sounding board, that person who believed in me, who would listen, to me venting about some challenge I was having as a young supervisor, or, he's that phone call I would make at the end of a really long shift if something went really wrong. And that kind of outlet has always been really valuable to me, because you don't want to bring all that home. My husband is very tolerant in talking about energy, but he is not as passionate about this as I am, and I think he would be he'll take it, but at some point he's just wants me to feel better and let's move on. You want that person at work who can really connect and understand and knows the players like you do, and can help you work through a problem. To me, that's a mentor, and Brian was that for me for many years. A sponsor is a very different relationship, and we do sometimes mix them up, but because sometimes people will reach out to me and be like, will you be my sponsor? So a sponsor, and I've had them in my career, the CEO of New York Power Authority certainly was a sponsor of me and gave me that opportunity to try corporate communications, for example. A sponsor is someone who is going to help you advance. They are in the room talking about you when you're not in the room. And that can make or break whether you get a promotion. It happens every day. And the difference though with a mentor relationship can really be just, almost just like one way, like it's just for my benefit so I can vent. Though when I mentor other people, I actually get a lot out of it personally. A sponsor relationship is much more of a two-way relationship. So if I'm going to talk you up and I'm going to go out on a limb and someone's going to say, Jill, you believe that person is ready for that executive role? And I say, yes, I do. Now we are in this together, because if you're not ready or it doesn't go well, I have put political capital on the line here as well. And so I think of a sponsor relationship as one where first, I need to have some knowledge of your abilities. I need to have some visibility into, how you perform and where your aspirations are. And so you can't just you can almost mentor anyone over coffee once a month. You can't sponsor anyone that way. You need to have a relationship where the sponsor is going to have some confidence that when they put their reputation associated with you, it's going to go well. And then I'm vested in the success of those people. So the people I've promoted, I set up more often one-on-ones with them. I'm giving them constructive feedback after a presentation that didn't go well. I'm the first person who they will hear from, because I will say, hey, next time, let's do it like this, or have you thought about this, or here's, because I want them to succeed, because we're in this together. And I sponsor, I feel like I pay it forward, because I have benefited in my career, and I sponsor intentionally people who I know, who I'm excited about, who I believe have tremendous potential to make a big impact in our business, because we all win when that's the case. And the advice I give people on how to find a sponsor is look for those opportunities where it can be, that two-way, where they can, for example, in a business resource group. A lot of executives sponsor business resource groups, and then they're typically staffed by people who are more early or mid-career. And so these are opportunities where I get visibility to a bunch of people who are organizing events and doing communications for employees. And because of that, they're doing me a favor, because I'm sponsoring a group that's being successful, and I'm getting a visibility into their capabilities. And I'm going to be much more comfortable then when it's time for a special assignment or a promotion or something to be like, oh yeah, I know Danny. I've been watching Danny for the last year. He's been doing a great job on that business resource group. And yep, I support Danny. So think about opportunities where you can get visibility, even with people who are multiple levels above you, where you are doing something and showing your skills, and then you can have that two-way relationship.
That's great and super helpful. And as a little mini plug, in about 10 minutes, about a mentor-mentee program that we're kicking off within the PLMA. And I guess on the, sort of building off of that, we did a survey earlier or at the end of last year asking PLA members what they're most interested in. And the two big groups represented in the PLMA are people working for utilities and people working for technology providers. And lots of people are interested in maybe making a jump from one to the other. And you talked a little bit about like this confidence issue of not knowing what you can bring to the table when you make that move into whatever new role it would be. But I'm curious if you had any advice for the audience about people who do want to make that switch from one to the other.
Well, I think look at what do we have in common, right? So ultimately, it might be the customer or how you define the customer. And so if you are a partner to a utility now, but you want to work inside the utility or vice versa, right? I look at what's the most important thing for that company that you're trying to get into, and frame your experience, your skills, your passion around that. And so if you're going to be a vendor to a utility, then the utility is your client. And so, you're trying to achieve performance objectives around programs and deliver for the utility so that you win that next contract. Versus in the utility, the program is not the most important thing, right? The end use experience of the customer is the most important thing, of which the program is just one piece. So think about kind of framing your capabilities, your interests, your passion around what is the most important thing of that target audience you have, which company you're trying to go into.
And Jill, I've always felt like you were really good about looking broadly to hire new talent. And I'm curious what advice you'd have for managers or leaders that are looking to bring in those different points of view and that diverse talent.
So I think that part of that concept around, controlling and leveraging our diversity, I don't just share it because I want everyone to get promoted, and I do, and I hope everyone has a very fulfilling career, but I just truly believe that we are going to make better decisions, we get better outcomes, we protect ourselves against the unexpected risks when we have a diverse of experience, a point of view, a background, team that's come together to make those decisions. So my own leadership team, the direct reports to me, which I've been able to make some of those decisions. I inherited some as I've had this job now only for 6 months, but it's very diverse in every metric. Where 50% of my leadership team are women, 50% of the executive management team at SCE is women, and now as of April, 50% of our board of directors are women, and 70% of them meet another diversity metric. And so I think those being intentional about pulling together a diverse team is something I do, and I work for a company that believes in it because it drives better outcomes for, we serve 15 million of the most diverse communities in the world, and so we need to be able to connect with and understand and anticipate the needs of those communities. How is hard. It's very hard, and we get in our own way all the time. We write job descriptions that make it impossible for us to hire someone with diverse background because we say, if you want to be a utility planner, you need 7 years of utility planning experience. It's like, okay. So like what I've been trying to do is change job requirements. We've done that here at SCE. It used to be that you had to be a qualified electrical worker, which effectively means you had to be a lineman in order to become a first line supervisor. That is not how utilities work all over the country. Everyone has a different approach, but we, through a lot of work from a whole team within this company, changed that requirement, and you no longer have to have qualified electrical worker background in order to be a first line supervisor. That doesn't mean to me that we will never have linemen be first line supervisors. There's a big value in a promotion from the line. But I also think there's a value in people with my background being first line supervisors, because that's the experience I had on the East Coast, and it has definitely made me better in my current job as a result. So it starts with job descriptions and job qualifications and getting a lot more minimal around what our requirements are. And the talent market today, my team, we talk about it very frequently, complaining about it, honestly, because it's really difficult. And I think anyone out there on the job market right now, you know that it's what would that make it, a seller's market, right? The candidates have a lot more control today than they had a year ago or 2 years ago. But I try to frame it for my team around, no, this is an opportunity, because this is our chance to finally shed some of these anchors that we have in these job qualifications that make it hard for us to get people with different backgrounds. This is going to be the out of necessity. We're going to hire people from different utilities or from different industries, because we're not going to be able to keep hiring the same people we've been hiring for 10 years. And also now anyone who comes here, I'm going to have a lot more confidence they're here because they want to be here, because they had competing offers. And in my business, Rivian is stealing people from us, Amazon, TikTok, Zoom. They could have gone anywhere they want. They came to us because they believe in our mission. They want to solve climate change. They want to be part of this integral backbone of the economy. And so I try to leverage this contracting talent market as an opportunity for us to improve our diversity, and then also maybe improve kind of the level of commitment of the employees who we're attracting.
Love it. I couldn't agree more. And market is super tight. So it's great that you're using that to your advantage right now. Jill, you'd mentioned as a resource, How to Have a Good Day by Carolyn Webb. Any other resources that you'd recommend to this group? Oh,
I love to read. I love hearing about reading recommendations and sharing them. And so I've got a lot of books I could list off. My favorite book, personal business, is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. It's written in little chapters that you could just read one chapter and get a lot out of it. There's an incredible chapter about Alcoa and safety that I refer to a lot. So I love Habit. It really is about, like, we can change and make things a lot easier for ourselves, for our teams, for our communities. I also am a big Adam Grant fan. I love Give and Take, which is one of his earlier books. He's written many good books since then, and I've read them all. But I love hearing book recommendations too. So welcome anyone to shout out in the chat or send me an email or text on something you're reading, because I read quite a lot, so I'm always looking for the next one. Yes, please. If anyone has anything, please do put that in the chat. And Jill, what about like a non-work related book or podcast that you're listening to? Any favorites? I'm a New York Times Daily addict, so I listen to the Daily every day. I also like Vox has a podcast called Today Explained. And then maybe like a more, if I don't want to be newsy or I don't feel like I need to be learning something right now, I love NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour. And in fact, if I can't figure out like what's the next show to binge watch, I usually just look through the recent episodes of Pop Culture Happy Hour and watch whatever they recommended. So. Oh, fantastic. I love it. Well, Jill, we're nearing our 1 hour marker. I want to thank you for giving us your time. I know you have a lot of requests for your time, and we very much appreciate this. We're also turning this into a podcast, so it will reach more people. But I just think the experience you bring and your ability to just always be looking at this world in a new way, it's very exciting, and it's so motivating, and it's wonderful to hear your point of view. So thank you for sharing it with all of us. Thank you. Well, I see there's some questions we didn't get to, so I'll put my email in the chat. And you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram. I'll put that in the chat too. Great. So, yeah. Well, with that, Jill, I want to thank you and wish you a really great week. Very much appreciate your time. And I appreciate the advice you gave around
mentoring, sponsoring, how you've used it to progress your career. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Jessie because she is going to kick off our mentoring program. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah. Thank you, Jill. And Jill, I have to say, I wrote down your advice to always ask yourself, what am I doing to make everyone feel like they're included? Because I think that that's something that in our chaotic work days, we don't get enough time to ask ourselves, and something that can really catalyze change. And so on that note, if you want to include others, if you want to grow your network, if you want to expand, as Sangeeta has mentioned several times, we are launching a mentoring program. We have heard definitions for mentor, for sponsor. I think I heard ally, fan. So I'm going to bucket this truly as an assigned mentor program. It is a 10-week program that kicks off August 29th and will go till that last week in October. So as we enter the fall season, and we are currently recruiting both mentors and mentees. So whether you feel that you have experience to share, regardless of what stage of your career you're in, regardless of whether you're a vendor or utility or something else, or whether you're looking for advice, have some questions, or just want to get to know folks like Jill who are in our industry and open to helping out, please sign up. You'll see this bit.ly link here. It's not an active hyperlink, but if you go to it, if you highlight it, pretty easy to remember. You'll be brought to a form. Sangeeta, Erica, and I are going to do our darndest to match you with an appropriate mentor. Again, this is different age ranges, different genders, different careers and desires. So fill out the form as completely as you can, and we will be in touch. And you'll see a few more recruiting pings from us as we move through the summer season. So thank you all so much. Thank you again, Jill. Thank you, Sangeeta. And Judy, I'll pass it off to you to close out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jessie. And Jill, again, I can't say enough great things about what a inspiring, honest, clear, and useful conversation you brought to us today. So we're just delighted to have this and delighted to see where this goes. So thank you for being our inaugural Women in DM series speaker. We appreciate it very much. And of course, Sangeeta and Jessie and Erica, who made this happen. Thank you too from PLMA. Okay, so at this point, we want to encourage everybody to go to PLMA's Load Management Resource Center, where in fact you can find different types of content. We have everything from webinars to training materials to publications to topics that have come up over the years, so hot topics, you name it. So we have this resource here. Jill's webinar today will be added here so you can watch it again. And as Jessie mentioned, it will also go to the podcast. So we're delighted to be able to continue to offer all of this content to PLMA members and PLMA stakeholders. And then as we move on, I wanted to also flag that we are in the process of getting ready for PLMA's 46 conference. It will be held in person in Arizona in November, and we are in the process of closing out our call for presentations. And this is an opportunity that is available to everybody. So whether you are a member or you're thinking about being a member or you're not a member at all, if you have a great topic that has to do with DR and DER, we would love to get your proposal. Please go to PLMA's website and it will take you to an area where it's very simple to submit a proposal. And all of the proposals will be judged by PLMA's volunteer, peer-selected members who will be able to provide feedback and information and help us to put together an agenda for the conference that really does meet everybody's interests and needs. In addition, we have 2 more webinars that are coming up in the not too distant future. Next week, we will be talking to our friends at ACEEE, who will be talking about demand side solutions to winter peaks. And that is a really important issue as we get into more and more winter peaking utilities. So come and hear a little bit from our friends at ACEEE. And of course, all of this information and sign up is available on our peak load calendar, which is on our website. And then last of all, we have another webinar that is coming up in June, and this is with our friends at Baltimore Gas and Electric, together with their partner WeaveGrid. They won a 19th PLMA award for some of the very interesting and innovative work that they've been doing around telematics-based smart EV programming. So if you have an interest in EVs, this will be a really interesting experience to listen to what they did, how it worked out, what worked, what didn't work, and how they're moving forward with that program. All right. Those are also on the PLMA webinar. And now, thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. You've been listening to a load management dialogue presented by PLMA. To learn more about upcoming dialogues and for an upcoming archive of recordings, please visit our website or your favorite podcast platform. And that concludes this edition. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone.